42 years of marriage taught me exactly one thing about betrayal.
It never knocks.
It walks in wearing your own son's face. My name is Robert Callahan. Everyone calls me Bob. I'm 69 years old. I've spent almost every one of those years on the water in some form or another. First as a kid who couldn't afford a boat of his own. Later as a man who built a company that put thousands of other people on the water instead. Callahan Boatworks started as a single rented slip at Cedar Bay Marina. A folding card table, a coffee can full of brass screws. 40 years later, we had 4 full-service marinas stretched along the Cedar Bay shoreline, from Pine Rapids down to Bellport, and a boat-building shop that still, to this day, builds wooden runabouts by hand for people who understand that some things shouldn't be made of fiberglass. My wife Margaret was the reason any of it worked. I built the business, she built the home that made the business worth having. And 9 months ago, on a Sunday morning that started like every other Sunday morning of my life, I found her on the kitchen floor. The doctors called it a brain aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms. Here on a Saturday night, laughing at something on the television. Gone before Sunday's coffee finished brewing. I didn't know it yet, but that Sunday morning was only the first time my whole world got pulled out from under me. It would not be the last. The one thing Margaret left behind that I could still reach out and touch was sitting in the boathouse behind our home on Birch Point Peninsula. A 1959 Chris Craft Sportsman, mahogany hull, chrome trim. The kind of boat nobody builds anymore because nobody has the patience for it. Margaret bought the wreck of it at an estate auction 25 years ago, $400. And then she spent every free hour of the next quarter century bringing it back from the dead. She sourced the original hardware from a salvage yard in Wisconsin. She hand-planed replacement ribs out of white oak she seasoned herself. She stripped 7 layers of bad varnish with nothing but a heat gun, a scraper, and language I never taught her. She called the boat Serenity. Everybody else on the peninsula just called it Margaret's boat. There was never any question whose it was. Since she passed, I'd walk out of that boathouse most mornings before the shop opened. I'd sit in Serenity with my coffee and just breathe in the smell of varnish and cedar. And something underneath it, something I swear was still her. It was the only place in the world where the missing didn't feel quite so sharp. That particular Monday morning, coffee in hand, I pushed open the boathouse door, and I stopped so hard I nearly dropped the mug. The lift was empty. The cradle where Serenity had sat for 2 decades held nothing but a puddle of fresh bilge water, and a rectangle of clean concrete where 25 years of dust hadn't had time to settle back down. The boat was gone. My first thought was theft. My second thought, once the panic cleared enough for logic to crawl back in, was that theft made no sense. The boathouse door was locked, same as always. No broken glass, no pried hinges. The security camera, the one Margaret insisted we install after a break-in 2 docks down, had recorded nothing but an empty dock at 3 in the morning. And then, at 11 minutes past, a gap. Somebody had cut the feed. Somebody who knew exactly where the junction box was. Only 3 people in the world had a key to that boathouse and the code to that camera system. Me, Hank Delgado, our longtime caretaker, who was currently on a fishing trip in the Upper Peninsula with his phone turned off. And my son. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself a lot of things that morning that turned out to be wrong. Later. Once the shock burned off enough to let me think in straight lines again, the practical side of it wasn't hard to piece together. Nathan owned his own boat trailer, the kind he used every summer for his own runabout. And he knew our private ramp better than anybody outside the family. He didn't need to break a single thing. He let himself in with his own key, backed the trailer down before sunrise, winched Serenity out of her cradle, and was gone before the birds started up next door. Winslow had mentioned taking delivery the afternoon before, which meant Nathan had loaded a boat, towed it the better part of an hour up the peninsula to Bellport, closed a sail, and made it back in time to pack for a transatlantic flight, all inside one impossibly tight window. A man doesn't move that fast, that cleanly, unless he's done the planning days in advance. My hands were shaking hard enough that it took 2 tries to unlock my phone and call Nathan. He picked up on the 4th ring. And the second I heard the background noise, the flat, echoing announcements, the shuffle of 100 strangers' luggage, I knew he wasn't standing anywhere near Cedar Bay. "Hey, Dad. Little busy right now. Where are you, Nathan?" "Cedar Bay Regional. Actually, we're boarding in 20.
Where is your mother's boat?
A pause. Not a guilty one, an annoyed one. Like I'd interrupted something important to ask about a detail that shouldn't have mattered. "Okay, don't freak out. Vanessa and I are finally doing that Europe trip we've been talking about."
Where is it, Nathan?
"I sold it. Winslow took it off my hands yesterday. Gave me a fair price. Everybody's happy." The words landed like a dock piling coming down on my chest. I had to put my free hand flat on the workbench just to keep upright. "You sold your mother's boat?" "Dad, Mum's been gone almost a year. That boat was just sitting in a shed collecting dust and eating up insurance money. It's not doing anybody any good rotting in a boathouse. That boat was 25 years of her life. It wasn't yours to sell. Technically, it's going to be mine eventually anyway, right? I'm the only kid you've got. I just moved the timeline up a little." A boarding chime rang out behind him. He raised his voice over it. Casual as anything. "Look, Vanessa's been in a rough place since the funeral. She needs this trip. First class, the whole thing. I did it for her. You always say family comes first. I'm just doing the same thing you do." I almost laughed. There was nothing funny in it. Vanessa hadn't cried once at Margaret's funeral. She'd spent the reception complaining that the caterer's chicken was dry. "Get over it, Dad. It's a boat. We'll talk when we land." And the line went dead. I stood in that empty boathouse with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. And something cold and very clear settled into my chest, right where the panic had been a minute earlier. Because here's the thing about running a company for 40 years. You learn to smell a story that doesn't add up before you can even say why. A first-class trip to Europe for 2 people, even an extravagant one, tops out somewhere around $35,000, maybe $40,000. If Vanessa booked every suite in sight, I knew exactly what Serenity was worth. Margaret and I had her appraised for the insurance rider 3 years back. A fully restored, numbers-matching 1959 Chris Craft Sportsman in that condition doesn't sell for $40,000. It sells for closer to $300,000. To the right collector, more. Nathan was arrogant. He could be careless with other people's feelings in a way that still surprised me, even at 39 years old. But he was not stupid, and he had never in his life left $260,000 sitting on a table. The trip wasn't the reason. The trip was the cover story, and I had no idea yet just how deep the real story went. I was still standing there working that math when my phone rang again. Unknown number. Area code out of Bellport. "Mr. Callahan, Gary Winslow over at Winslow Classic Boat Brokerage." His voice had an edge to it I didn't like. "I bought a boat off your son yesterday. The Sportsman. I know he told you." "How did you get my number, Mr. Winslow? And how does a broker hand over that kind of money without confirming who he's handing it to?" He didn't get all of it. Not even close. And he isn't going to. Standard practice on anything over $50,000 where a power of attorney's involved. I write a deposit, hold the rest in escrow, and don't release a dime of the balance until the title clears the state and I've sat on it for 30 days. That boat still registered to me and to my wife. It never got retitled to my son. He showed up with a letter, supposedly notarized, supposedly signed by you, and a license that matched the family name. Looked clean enough for a deposit check. Wasn't clean enough for me to wire out $260,000 to a stranger. POA or no POA. That's not caution, sir. That's just how the paperwork works on a boat like this. Your name was right there on the registration. And in this business, everybody on this bay knows who Robert Callahan is. Took me 2 minutes to find your office number. I was going to call you either way, before I released another cent, he went on. And then I found what your wife hid behind the dash. And today stopped being about the paperwork. A deposit, not the sale. Whatever Nathan walked away with at that airport gate wasn't the boat's real worth. It was just enough cash to cover 2 plane tickets, with the rest of it sitting frozen in an escrow account the second I picked up this phone.
And that letter had my name on it.
I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been asked to sign anything. Whatever Nathan handed him wasn't real, and Gary Winslow had just told me so, without either of us saying the word forged out loud yet.
What did she leave?
I'd rather show you than say it over the phone. But, Mr. Callahan, whatever your son told you about why he sold this boat, I don't think that's the real reason. I found a metal box, zip-tied up under the dash behind the gauge cluster. Somebody hid it well. It wasn't meant to be found by anybody but your wife.
I don't remember hanging up the phone.
I don't remember the 40-minute drive up the peninsula to Bellport. What I remember is standing in Gary Winslow's shop, looking down at a small, fireproof lockbox sitting open on his workbench.
And inside it, a flash drive.
A stack of folded papers held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age, and a spiral notebook, in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere in the world.
Margaret's handwriting.
I almost didn't call you, Gary said, rubbing the back of his neck. Figured it was old paperwork. Then I opened the notebook. I picked it up with hands that weren't entirely steady. The first page was dated a little over 2 years back, months before Margaret's death. The first line read, "If anyone but me ever finds this, something has already gone wrong, and Robert needs to know everything." I looked up at Gary. He was watching me with the careful, sympathetic expression of a man who already suspected he'd handed a widower a bomb. "Mr. Winslow," I kept my voice as steady as I could manage, "I need you to hold this boat. Don't sell it, don't move it, don't touch it. I'll pay whatever it costs to keep it right here." "Sir, I already figured that much." He nodded at the notebook in my hands. "Whatever's in there, I hope it's not as bad as it looks." It was worse. I sat in the cab of my truck in Gary Winslow's parking lot for the better part of an hour, reading my dead wife's handwriting by the dashboard light. By the time I finished, I understood 2 things with total clarity. The first was that Margaret had known something was wrong at Callahan Boatworks long before I did. The second was that whatever it was, it went a lot further than a boat sale at an airport gate. The notebook wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Dates, dollar figures, initials instead of full names in a few places, like she hadn't been entirely sure yet who she could trust to write it down plainly. Payments to a vendor account that didn't match up to any actual vendor. A pattern of invoices from our Bellport and Pine Rapids locations that spiked every quarter and then quietly corrected themselves before the annual audit. And threaded through the numbers, in the margins, her own observations, in blue ink. Doesn't add up. Asked DF about the Lakeside account discrepancy. Got a story about a software glitch. Not buying it. Going to pull the last 3 years of statements myself. DF, my VP of operations for the last 12 years. A man named Dennis Foster. I'd hired him myself. I'd stood up at his wedding. I trusted him with the keys to 4 marinas and every dollar that moved through them. The last entry in the notebook was dated 11 days before Margaret died.
Found the wire transfers.
Cayman accounts. This isn't Dennis acting alone. There's a second signature on the authorization, and it isn't his. Talk to Robert Sunday. Everything's on the flash drive. Don't let this die with me. I read that last line 4 times before I could make myself believe it said what it said. She'd found it. She'd found all of it. Days before she died. And she never got the chance to tell me. And whoever the second signature belonged to had just spent 9 months acting like the money and the silence was theirs to keep. My phone still had 1 bar of battery left when I called Diane Whitfield, my attorney, Margaret's closest friend outside the family. It was nearly 9 at night. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always did for me. I told her everything. The empty boathouse, the airport phone call, the lockbox, the notebook, the initials DF, the second signature Margaret never got to name. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Diane spoke again. Her voice had gone flat and careful, in the way it only did when she was genuinely worried. "Robert, listen to me. Don't call Dennis. Don't call Nathan. Don't tell anyone at the company anything is wrong. Get that flash drive to a forensic accountant I trust before the sun comes up tomorrow. Let's find out exactly how deep this goes before anybody has a chance to shred a single file. Diane, if Margaret found this 11 days before she died... I know what you're thinking. Don't go there yet. We don't have proof of anything except that your wife suspected fraud. Let's get proof before we get angry. Angry gets you sued. Proof gets you justice. I sat in that dark cab a long time after we hung up, the notebook resting on the passenger seat, like it might still speak if I waited long enough. Out over the water, the lights of Bellport were coming on one by one, and somewhere over the Atlantic, my son and his wife were 35,000 feet up, drinking champagne on a stolen boat's money, with absolutely no idea that the ground back home had just opened up underneath every single one of us. I still didn't have a name for that second signature, only a gut feeling I didn't want to be right about. And I had no idea yet that when the name finally surfaced, the person who'd actually moved the largest sums of money out of the country wouldn't be the one I feared most. By the second morning, I had a name on a spreadsheet where a signature should have been. And I still couldn't make myself believe it. Diane's forensic accountant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Laura Kim, met us at Diane's office at 7 in the morning, with the flash drive already loaded onto a laptop that never left her sight. It took her less than 3 hours to lay out, in cold, undeniable numbers, exactly what my wife had stumbled onto. For a little over 3 years, funds had been quietly siphoned out of the Bellport and Pine Rapids Marina accounts through a shell vendor called Lakeside Marine Supply, a company that, as far as Laura could tell, existed only on paper, and a bank account in the Cayman Islands. Dennis Foster's authorization appeared on nearly every invoice, and on the wire transfer approvals, the ones that required a second executive signature above a certain dollar amount. There it was, plain as day on the screen. Nathan Callahan. Laura watched my face the way people watch a man standing too close to a ledge. Not unkindly, he's had signing authority on the corporate account since he started as regional manager 4 years ago. Mr. Callahan, I want to be clear before you jump anywhere. A signature doesn't automatically mean he knew what he was signing. Some executives sign what's put in front of them without reading every line. My jaw tightened. My son reads everything. He negotiated his own trust fund distribution schedule when he was 26. He does not sign things without reading them. Diane put a hand on my arm. Then let's find out for certain, before we say another word to him. If he's involved, we handle it right. If he's not, we protect him. Some small, stubborn part of me was still hoping Laura was wrong. That part of me got smaller every hour. Laura spent the rest of that day, and most of the next, tracing the money. And the picture that came together was worse than fraud committed out of greed alone. It was fraud committed with patience, over years, by somebody who understood exactly how our accounting worked, because I had trained him myself. Small amounts at first, easy to write off as rounding errors and vendor overcharges, then larger. Once, nobody came looking. The total, once Laura finished tracing every wire, came to just over $2.1 million over 3 years. Funneled through Lakeside accounts, one under Dennis Foster's name, and one under a holding company registered to an address in Lansing. That traced back, after a day of digging, to Vanessa, not Nathan. Laura slid a printout across the table. Your daughter-in-law set up the second account 18 months ago. Registered agent, filing fees, the works. She's the one who moved the largest transfers out of the country. I sat back in my chair and thought about every family dinner where Vanessa had steered the conversation toward vacations we should all take together. Every time she'd mentioned a little too casually how tight things were on Nathan's regional manager salary, even though I knew exactly what that salary was. I thought about the way she'd cried at Margaret's funeral for exactly as long as it took people to notice she was crying, and not 1 second longer. I didn't know it yet, but Vanessa wasn't the icing on this scheme. She was the one who baked the whole cake. Nathan and Vanessa landed back in Michigan on the 5th day, jet-lagged and tan, with a suitcase full of duty-free and absolutely no idea what was waiting for them. I asked them to come by the house that evening. Told Nathan I wanted to talk about the boat. Nothing more. Keep my voice level. Keep the trap quiet until it was time to close it. Diane sat in the next room with the door cracked, a recorder running, per her explicit instructions. Laura's full report sitting in a folder on the kitchen table. Nathan walked in first, sunburned and loose, already talking before he cleared the doorway. "Dad, before you start, I know the boat thing was harsh, timing-wise, but I already told you why." "Sit down. Nathan."
Something in my voice stopped him mid-sentence.
Vanessa trailed in behind him, scrolling her phone, barely glancing up. I kept my eyes on Nathan. "I want to talk about Lakeside Marine Supply." The room went very still. Vanessa's thumb stopped moving on the screen. "Never heard of it," Nathan answered. "Too fast." "That's interesting, because your signature is on 11 wire transfer authorizations, sending company money to a Lakeside Marine Supply account in the Cayman Islands. Over the last 3 years, $2.1 million, give or take." "Dad, I sign 100 things a week. If Dennis put something in front of—" "Don't." My voice came out harder than I meant it to. "Don't do that. Don't make this about Dennis's paperwork. Your mother found this before she died. Nathan, she wrote it all down. Dates, numbers, your initials right there next to his. She'd been planning to tell me that very Sunday morning. The same Sunday morning I found her on the kitchen floor. She never got the chance, because the aneurysm took her first." Vanessa's face had gone the color of old paper.
Nathan opened his mouth.
Nothing came out.
"And the second account," I continued,
my voice steadier than I felt. "The one that received the largest transfers. That one's not registered to Dennis at all. It's registered to a holding company, filed by you, Vanessa, 18 months ago, in Lansing. I want you to understand something about that moment. I have negotiated boat manufacturing contracts worth more than my son's entire net worth without my pulse changing. In that kitchen, watching my daughter-in-law's face collapse in real time. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press them flat against the table. "Dad, listen. I don't want to hear another lie in this house." I stood, both palms flat on the table. "Not one more. Your mother spent 25 years restoring a boat with her bare hands, and you forged a power of attorney letter to sell it in an afternoon, so you could buy plane tickets with money you'd already been stealing for 3 years before that. Get out of my house, both of you. My attorney will be in touch." "You can't just—" "I built this company from a card table and a coffee can. Nathan, I can absolutely just." They left. I sat alone in that kitchen for a long time after the door shut, listening to the quiet, the way you listen to a wound, to see how bad it actually is. I thought that confrontation was the hardest part. I was wrong about that too. The hardest part was still 3 weeks away, and it was going to come from Dennis Foster's mouth, not my son's. I confronted Dennis on the 6th day, in his own office, Diane beside me, Laura's full financial trail printed out and sitting on the desk between us like a loaded gun. I expected denial. I expected anger. What I got instead was something close to relief. Like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long, his shoulders had forgotten how to sit level. Dennis wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your son came to me 4 years ago, fresh off his regional manager promotion, complaining about how tight his salary was, compared to what he thought he deserved as your only kid. Vanessa had expensive taste, and Nathan had a chip on his shoulder about being handed a title without being handed the money that should have come with it. I told him it wasn't my problem. He rubbed his face with both hands. He came back a month later with the shell vendor idea already worked out. Lakeside. Said it'd be small, quiet. Nobody would ever look. I should have walked into your office that same day and told you everything. God knows I should have. Instead, I let him talk me into a cut of it. And once you're in, Robert, you're in. There's no clean way out of something like that. My wife found it, I said. I let that sit in the room a moment. 11 days before she died, she found it. And she was going to tell me on a Sunday. She never got the chance. Dennis's face went white. I didn't know that. I swear to you, Robert. I did not know Margaret had found anything. Did Nathan? A long silence. I don't know. But I know he started moving faster with the transfers about 3 weeks before she passed. I always figured that was just him getting greedier. Now I'm wondering if he knew she was getting close.
I want to tell you that sentence didn't do anything to me.
That would be a lie. I want to tell you I didn't spend that whole night wondering whether my own son had watched his mother start to unravel a fraud he was committing and simply decided to speed up instead of stop. I spent every hour of that night wondering exactly that, and I have never landed on an answer I can live with. Nora's full forensic report went to the federal prosecutor's office on the 9th day. Diane's phone call happened the moment she saw Cayman wire transfers in the file. Wire fraud crossing international lines doesn't stay a local matter for long. Diane had already frozen every account Nathan and Vanessa had access to at the company, cut them out of the corporate insurance, begun the paperwork to have Nathan removed as a beneficiary of both the family trust and, eventually, my will. Dennis resigned before I had the chance to fire him, and cooperated fully with investigators from the moment the subpoenas landed, which Diane told me flatly was likely the only thing standing between him and a sentence twice as long as the one he'd eventually get. Nathan and Vanessa hired their own attorney, a sharp young litigator out of Lansing, who tried for about a week to argue the whole thing was an accounting misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by a grieving father. That argument lasted exactly as long as it took federal prosecutors to lay out 11 wire authorizations with Nathan's own signature. A forged power of attorney letter used to sell Serenity out from under me, a shell company registered in Vanessa's name, and a dead woman's handwritten ledger, dated weeks before her death, entered into evidence with a chain of custody that ran straight from a boat's hidden dashboard compartment to a courtroom. Sitting in that kitchen the night I threw my son out of my house, I had no way of knowing the coldest part of this whole ordeal was still ahead of me. It wasn't the fraud. It was watching a courtroom decide, in cold, legal language, exactly how much of my family I had left. By the time the case reached trial, 6 months had passed since I found an empty boathouse on a Monday morning, and I had aged into every one of those months. Dennis took a plea agreement early, cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence, 3 years in a federal facility, restitution ordered on whatever portion of the stolen funds could be traced back to accounts he controlled directly. He looked at me exactly once during his sentencing hearing, across a courtroom gone dead silent, and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I believed him. It didn't change anything. Nathan and Vanessa's case went the full distance. A jury trial. 6 days of testimony. Laura Kim walking 12 strangers through 3 years of wire transfers with the patience of a schoolteacher. And Margaret's notebook entered into evidence as Exhibit A, her handwriting projected onto a screen in a courtroom she never lived to see. I sat in the gallery every single day. Nathan never once turned around to look at me. Vanessa looked at me exactly once, on the final day, with an expression I still can't fully name. Not remorse, not anger, something closer to disbelief that any of this had actually happened to her. The jury took 4 hours to convict them both. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, forgery. The judge, a stern woman with no patience left for excuses, by the time sentencing came around, handed Nathan 7 years in a federal facility, and Vanessa 9. Citing the offshore holding company Vanessa had personally structured, the one that laundered the largest transfers, as evidence of a more calculated and knowing hand than a signature alone could show. Even though her direct involvement had started later than her husband's, watching my son stand up in a courtroom, in a suit I'd bought him for his college graduation, hearing a stranger in a black robe tell him how many years of his life he'd traded for a boat sale and a stolen fortune. That's not a moment I can describe to you the way I've described anything else in this story. Some silences don't have a description. That one just sat in my chest for a long time afterward and refused to leave. The restitution order recovered just over 1.9 million of the original 2.1 million stolen. Most of it clawed back from the frozen offshore accounts before Vanessa's attorneys could finish arguing jurisdiction. I didn't want that money folded quietly back into the company's operating account like nothing had happened. Margaret deserved better than that. So working with Diane and a small board of local doctors, I used the recovered funds to establish the Margaret Callahan Foundation for Aneurysm Research and Awareness, based right here in Cedar Bay, funding early detection screening programs at 3 regional hospitals and research grants aimed at catching exactly the kind of silent, symptomless warning signs that took her from me on an ordinary Saturday night. Her name is on hospital equipment now, instead of a shell company's paperwork. That felt like the only correct ending for that money. As for Callahan Boatworks, the fraud exposed rot I hadn't known to look for. I brought in an outside auditing firm to review every account at all 4 marinas, replaced half the senior management team, and this time I didn't hire from the outside to fill those seats. I promoted from the docks, mechanics, dock hands, the people who'd spent 15 and 20 years actually building and maintaining the boats, instead of managing spreadsheets about them. The business runs leaner now, and honestly it runs better. Loyalty, built on decades of hard work, turned out to be worth more than any resume with a fancy letterhead ever was. I want to tell you the story ends there, clean and tidy. It doesn't. Not completely. Some stories don't get a perfectly tied bow, and I've learned that pretending otherwise does nobody any favors. Nathan writes to me sometimes from the facility. I've read every letter. I haven't answered one yet. I don't know if I ever will. And I've made a kind of uneasy peace with not knowing. Grief and betrayal don't run on the same schedule. And I'm not going to force either one just to make a tidier ending for anybody, including myself. What I did do, on a clear evening about a month after the trial ended, was drive out to Winslow Classic Boat Brokerage in Bellport and buy back Serenity. Gary had kept his word and held on to her the entire time, refusing 3 separate offers from collectors because, in his words, some boats aren't really for sale, no matter what the paperwork says. I paid him fairly for the trouble and towed her home myself, back to the boathouse on Birch Point Peninsula, back into the cradle where she'd sat for 25 years. Before a Monday morning I'll never fully stop thinking about. I go out there most evenings now, same as I used to, before any of this happened. I sit in serenity with a cup of coffee, run my hand along the mahogany Margaret sanded smooth with her own 2 hands, and I let myself remember her exactly the way she deserves to be remembered. Not as a footnote in a fraud case, but as the woman who spent 25 patient years turning a $400 wreck into something worth protecting with everything I had left. She found the truth before any of the rest of us did. She just never got the chance to say it out loud. I like to think that bringing her boat home and putting her name on a hospital research wing instead of letting it disappear into an offshore account is about as close as I can get to finishing the sentence she never got to say. Betrayal doesn't always come from a stranger, and it doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, over 3 patient years, from the people who had every reason in the world to protect you instead. And sometimes the person who catches it isn't the one everybody expects. It's the quiet one at the workbench, with a notebook and a pen, who never once stopped paying attention. Never mistake a grieving man's silence for weakness. And never underestimate what a woman who loved her family enough to build something with her own hands will do to protect it, even after she's gone. I've told you everything now. The boat, the betrayal, the 9 years my son will spend paying for it. Here's what I still can't stop wondering. If your own child stole from you, not out of desperation, but out of impatience, could you ever forgive that? Or would some part of you close a door and never open it again? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit you the way it hit me writing it down, hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Trust me, it's just as dark as this one.